thinking that you can get away with it is the worst possible thing that you can do in dealing with ethical decision. You may be lucky, but I never count on luck when it comes down to ethical decisions, because at some point your sins will find you out. You better assume that you'll be found out, and when you are found out, you must be prepared to.
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Dad, we spent last week's episode talking about the fashion valet debacle. And in that episode, we talked about how maybe some people have prematurely claimed that their downfall was due to unethical business practices. Obviously, we made it quite clear in the episode that what we think has happened is just merely poor risk management, bad business practice, not necessarily a matter of poor ethical decisions. But since we talked about that, I thought it would be good to spend this episode talking about ethics. How do we as leaders or even as individuals, how do we be distinctive in holding strong to our values? How do we then define what is ethical, what is not ethical, and how do we do all of that while being able to make maybe sometimes unpopular decisions or decisions that will put us in uncomfortable places in order to be ethical? You know, maybe before we go into it, just some definitions. And I really like this framing that we see in the Bible. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 23, you know, it says all things are permissible, but not all things are helpful. Similarly, Potter Stewart, who is the former Associate Justice of the US Supreme Court, says that ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. So we might have the right to do many things, but actually what ultimately is the right thing to do for your context, for maybe, you know, the different constitutions that might be that you might be beholden to. Maybe do you want to share some basic principles first, and then I think we can start to go into some examples.
Yeah, that's interesting that you made this quote, Leon, and the word about the right things to do. And I think the best way to put it very graphically is to think about it in 3 circles, Leon. The first circle is what is right. And obviously, you know what is right, and what is right is proper, and what is wrong. Think about the what is right as a white circle, and the black is what is wrong. And you can think about what is legal and what is illegal. But then there's things in the middle. The middle is where it's neither white nor black, but it's gray. And there's a lot of people that define whether the gray is permissible thing to do, whether it's the right thing to do, and there's a lot of subjectivity associated with it. That's why ethics is difficult. It's not clear. Whereas what is clear, what is legal thing to do, you know that is white. What is illegal is completely black. What is corrupt is completely black. This thing in the middle is the thing that we call ethics. So once you know what is in the gray zone, you have to figure out what to do with it. And before we get into how I have defined it in 3 rules. I have in my life, in my corporate work, I've now worked for 42 years, and I have defined 3 golden rules that govern, in my view, some of the best ways in handling ethical issues. But before we get into that, maybe it's useful for me to the genesis for how it came about. Is it okay to stop?
Why don't you share?
Yeah, when I went to Sri Lanka in 1998, at that time, in the previous episode, I did make reference to the fact that Shell bought 51% equity in the government company, and so we then ran it. And so Shell lost money for 5 years, and the government lost money for 22 years. So more than 25, 27 years, it was a loss making. So the day I arrived there, I discovered one thing that was so alarming. That was this, that the price for LPG, cooking gas, was regulated by the government, and it was lower than product cost. And so in all the negotiations we had with the government said this: Idris, that we will allow you to increase the price on condition that you do a few things. One, you abandon the monopoly, you bring competition to come there, and we do competitive bidding, which we agreed to do. And the last thing they said was this: we are going to hold a presidential election. This was in that particular year. And it came from the president's office, according to the people there. It said, we realized that Shell Sri Lanka, because we used to run the company, you have 13 kg cylinders, and these 13 kg cylinders, we fill it to the brim, and it does not comply with international safety standard. The international safety standard for 13 kg cylinder, you should only fill 12.5 kg of LPG inside the 13 kg cylinder to allow for expansion, and so that it does not blow. And so they said to me, keep the price constant, but drop the content.
Yeah.
You don't go and tell the public because we're going to run for presidential election, and that is your price increase. And so
what do you do?
So that was the conundrum that I was faced with. I was a relatively young CEO, and I looked at it, which I thought was fair, because it was against safety standard that we were doing. And so if I dropped it, it was complying with international safety standard. Right. But the government was going to tell me that that was the price increase that they allowed me. But they told me quite clearly that I cannot go and announce it. That was the problem, actually. I didn't realize that. So I took it. I said, okay. After thinking about it, then I figured out it was the right ethical decision to do, and we did implement it. As soon as we implemented it, within a week, there was a whistleblower. And the whistleblower came from one of the people in my plant, and I didn't know who the person was. And the person said, Shell is cheating the public because we did not tell them that we have dropped the quantity, and that it's still... The 13 kg cylinder no longer has 13 kg of gas. It has only 12.5, and the price remains the same. Oh, Leon, I was massacred from a public perception. And it was really terrible. I mean, it was, the newspapers carried story, the lie within Shell.
I remember that.
It was a photograph of me sitting on a rocket, LPG rocket. But I mean, this is actually terrible. And I remember, Leon, I used to go to the Rotary Club. When you go to a club like that, all the movers and shakers, we meet once a week at the Rotary Club. When I went there, I realized I was really in trouble when people didn't even dare to even ask me about it. I was almost like a leper. And they looked at me and never bothered to ask the question. Yep. So I felt it was terrible.
Big elephant in the room.
A big elephant in the room. So it was that moment I really sat down and reflected on it. I realized I had made a very, very wrong ethical decision, completely wrong ethical decision. And I thought about it. It was that particular incident, after a lot of reflection, that I came with the 3 golden rules on how I should, in future, deal with such ethical decision, the 3 golden rules.
Why don't you share your 3 rules?
The first rule is that never make any ethical decision alone by yourself, because you're relying on one conscience. You remember, as I said, you have 3 circles. Everything in a gray circle is not determined what's right and wrong, what's legal or illegal. It's about your conscience. What does your conscience say about this? And so if you're using your one conscience, your head alone, that may not be the right thing to do, because there's not enough people that's sparring with you. So you must decide with many people involved. So when I was Malaysia Airlines, any other job I ever had in Shell, when I'm confronted with any ethical issues, I never decide alone. I bring it to the management team, I bring it to the entire board, and we collectively decide.
I think that's important because, I used to hold on to this quote, and it's C.S. Lewis who said that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching, and that is integrity.
Yeah.
But I think in the case of having to then make a big decision like this, in your case, when you were deciding on it at the level of just at the level of the individual, so you deciding this thing alone, at that point in time, actually, you did deduce that it was
I did
was
this. I
ethical.
rationalized it. I
So
rationalized
it's not to say that you
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
that you didn't have integrity. In your mind,
my
that
mind.
was the right thing to do.
In my mind, it was the right thing to
And
do.
similarly, for I think a lot of people, if you are having to make a very big decision like this alone, you also might be having a certain bias or a certain skew, which will not be tested unless you have other people in there. Like you say, to use, I think that's the right word, to spar with you on the idea.
So that's rule number one. Rule number two is to take a piece of paper, write down the facts of the case on that piece of paper, and then identify the options that are available. Put them down, write down the pros and cons of each of the options. Then if the team decided option C is better than A and B, justify why option C is better than A and B on that piece of paper. So having now done that, that's rule number two. Then rule number three must apply. Then you take this piece of paper and then say, if this piece of paper is leaked in the social media, can I, collectively together with the management team, justify this in the public domain, yes or no? Chances are, if you cannot justify in the public domain what you're now doing here, it's a wrong ethical decision. And this must be, you must put it to the pressure test, that in the pressure test of the full public scrutiny, you can justify it. And this is very, very important. So to my mind, if you do number one, number two, and number three, and if you can do that, it's wonderful. One of my colleagues, Chris Tan, is now Dato Chris Tan. We had an office in Moscow. He called me from Moscow. He said, boss, I have an ethical decision I needed to make. And he asked me what I should do. He said, Chris, these are my 3 golden rules. Do all 3. So he went out to go and do them. So he gathered a team of people and they decided what they were going to do. Then he went to step number 2 to write it on a piece of paper. Then he called me the following day. Said, Idris, I'm in the midst of writing exactly what was agreed in that meeting. Halfway through writing that document, I realized that I cannot pass the litmus test, which is rule number 3. There's no way I can justify it if it comes to public domain. So clearly, we're not going to do it, he said. I'm not going to make a decision, so I'm going to drop it right now. So it's clear for me, if you follow this golden rule, it's very clear there are certain things that if you think you can hide it, you can get away by hiding it, you must believe that at some point you'll be found out. And when you are found out, you can justify it. Thinking that you can get away with it, it's the worst possible thing that you can do in dealing with ethical decision. You may be lucky, but I never count on luck when it comes down to ethical decisions, because at some point your sins will find you out. You better assume that you'll be found out, and when you are found out, you must be prepared to justify it. You believe you can justify in the public domain. Those are very, very simple rules to me, and all this while I've used these rules ever since Sri Lanka. Then I found it to be a very robust 3 golden rules to dealing with ethics.
What do you think in terms of, okay, so now we've talked about how do you still discern within a kind of small group? What's your approach to institutionalizing certain practices and safeguards to ensure that across the board, not just at a leadership level, but down the line, let's say you're working in a big company and you don't really have visibility to what some of the other operational teams are doing, some of the deals they might be making, or even just small things, small things that are just not done properly. How do you ensure that ethical decisions are being made across the board?
The most important thing, the starting point for any corporation or company, is to come up with a policy on business ethics. When I was in Shell, we had clear policy on business ethics, learning from many, many years of operating in many different countries, more than 100 countries. Shell found consistently that we did have a pattern of a problem when it came down to donating money to political parties. Because what was found was in certain countries, when the chief executive or the managing director donated money to that political party, very closely aligned, when the political party lost the government, Shell really found itself in trouble. So because of that pattern of a problem then caused Shell to revise its Shell business principles, that's what it is called, to say that Shell must not donate money to any political parties. In fact, it went one step further. Shell will not donate money to any religious bodies. So we can donate money to the government, but not to the political party.
I see.
So that's a big distinction. Because in countries where you have to abide by the law and you have to comply with certain things, donating money to government of day is fine, but not to political parties. Because we found that's a very fine balance when you get into a lot of questions about ethics.
Yeah.
And the beauty for that was this, Leon. When we were approached, when I was Shell Middle Distillates in many places where I was the boss, when people come and ask me for money for political donation, I just flash the policy, the Shell business principle. It is clear inside there that the penalty for breaching that, it meant the managing director can be fired. And so the beauty was when I flashed it, then they understood exactly why I did not do it. Not that I didn't support the political party, but it's just against the rule. So making a very clear policy framework, it's very useful. But to your point, Leon, there are certain things that you cannot legislate because they're too small to legislate. I mean, things like there's a lot of issues around what is an acceptable gift.
Yeah.
If 10 ringgit is an acceptable gift, the value, or what is acceptable, So this is difficult. In many cultures, people actually give things out during festivities, and it's quite common. And some societies, it's not.
Yeah.
That's why some legislating everything is not possible. That's why you return a lot to ethics. What you regard as unethical is a question about what's going on in your conscience. And that's why many conscience is better than one.
Yeah.
Because then there are many, many different views, interpretation, what is right and what is wrong. And the other thing to do is running courses for people, bringing people down to courses. And when I was in Shell, we used to run courses on business ethics. And there are many, many case studies that are given. And the question is, what would you do in the circumstance? And I remember one of the cases that we had was, there was a case around Johnson & Johnson case on Tylenol, the Tylenol crisis in 1982.
Yep.
And so let's say that the case is this. Leon, you were the managing director of Johnson & Johnson. This is a very well marketed and sold product, Tylenol. And so the problem now is that several people have died in Chicago because they've taken it, and the tablets that they took was laced with cyanide, and was clearly done by someone that wanted to maybe do something, to make life difficult for Johnson & Johnson. So the question is, do you now, on the basis of that one thing, it was clear that people were saying it was probably just one-off. Do you now say, keep quiet about it, allow it to go on, many people will die, or you will now go out and defend it because you said, well, this is not from our plant. You can't really control everything that's coming out from your plant, from the distribution, what people do with it. So the question is, what do you do? Do you pull out all the items? That's a question of ethics. So, in fact, as the story went through, Johnson & Johnson the CEO decided, this is a reputational issue. This is a brand issue for us. Let us take the high moral ground simply to say that 31 million bottles of Tylenol had to be withdrawn. And that would cost them more than $100 million at that time when they were doing just one product, and they did that. They took the decision, immediately made the announcement to pull out 31 million bottles. And there was a huge thing that they did. But the beauty when they took that ethical decision, from that moment onwards, people begin to trust Johnson & Johnson as a product, as a company that produced things because they took the higher ethical decisions and really said, although it has nothing to do with our plant, clearly the cyanide was not laced there by our people. It was somebody that wanted to sabotage our product. But we decided to pull all of them because how we don't know, maybe one or more of those bottles are still laced. So we pull all of them. We're not taking any chances. So I think because of that, the brand of Johnson & Johnson is highly trustworthy. This is very important. That's when you think about it in the golden scheme of things, it is very important to take with honesty and integrity and swift action to move on a crisis like that.
Yeah. You know, in the Bible, we talk a lot about being salt and light. So I think in the area of ethics, I think it's interesting to look at this idea of salt. You know, to be salt in an ethical quandary is to, you know, be like an antiseptic, right? Salt has antiseptic qualities. So how can we be distinctive in that sense? But also then salt is also used as flavor. When we look at it through that lens, then we see that actually the real distinctive, or rather the real value of salt is in its ability to be distinct. You know, so obviously there is a bit of a call to be different, to be salt and light, which would mean that in order to make ethical decisions, sometimes you're going to have to put yourself in maybe uncomfortable situations. So earlier you talked about an example, you used the Sri Lanka example as an example of where maybe you fell short in making in your ethical decision making, you made a wrong move. Now, on the flip side, I wonder if there have been situations where you have made a right ethical call, but at the expense of something, maybe at the expense of comfort or at the expense of support from maybe a client or other external parties. Anything like that? What were some of the most difficult decisions that you had to make in the interest of what was right?
Well, the incident for me, the example is that when I was in Malaysia Airlines, and we were putting out a bid to go and buy a bus or Boeing. And so I will not name the party that was involved, but they put out an offer to both me and to Azmi, rather separately, but we compared notes because we talked to each other. And there were millions of money, dollars that they were going to put. And they even told me exactly how they're going to do it, open an offshore bank account, and then for every aircraft that we put out there, and they would put that money inside there, and etc. And so that was how they wanted to do it. And so following those rules, I brought the matter up to the board, and I informed the board about this. And so this is what we clearly said. I will not mention which particular aircraft manufacturer was that, and we reported the case up to that organization. The consequence was that that person that was involved in doing it was actually removed by that company. Now, when I look back later in years, what has happened in the same period of time, the CEO of Garuda, Amir Sata, I think he went through exactly the same difficulties, and he took it. And the guy is still serving sentence. He's jailed. He's in jail. So when I really look at that episode, it's very clear when people give you that temptation. To your point, Leon, we must, as Christians, we must become the salt and the light.
You know, we've talked about ethics at an organizational level. I'm curious, what is your personal ethical leaning? How do you make ethical decisions internally?
I mean, for me, it's two things. One is I call it Christian ethics, because we are believers, Leon. So we really follow what is written in the Bible, and we follow as much as we can to follow that. Those are the Christian ethics, the rules that are clearly defined inside in the Bible. The second one is really now putting into practice, and how does that deal with the the philosophy of life that you hold. And in my case, personally, I have a simple motto in life, in big, whether it's corporate world, in my personal life, about big, fast results. I like to do things quickly, and I want to get results, and I also want to make sure it's big results. But therein lies the challenge, because when you have to deal with big, fast results, that's also the area where you get heavily tempted. If there's an option laid out before you that is in the gray area, that the question is, will you now take the option that give you the speed to get the results and the magnitude, the big results? And when you realize that if you are not aware of yourself, that is your weakness, you might actually succumb to it when you know very well, actually, when you really look at it, that actually is a wrong ethical decision to make.
I mean, like one example is that in every pandemic, in every war, there are winners and losers. There are huge opportunities out of times of crisis and even tragedy. So, when if an opportunity like that arises, how do you, as a leader, as a business owner, who obviously wants to play a game of impossible, who wants big, fast results, and we are unapologetic in saying that one of our, that our true north, our target at PEMANDU Associates this year is we have X amount profitability that we want to hit. But then if there's something, if there's an opportunity out there that maybe if we really look at it closely, capitalizes on deaths of people, capitalizes on warfare, how do you navigate that? How do you reconcile big, fast results being a good human being, Christian values?
You see, this is the key. Let's assume that you and I, we are in the business of supplying arms. And for a group that is going, you know very well that they're going to use your arms to go and kill many, many people. Either it's a terrorist organization or it's not even a terrorist organization, a proper organization. Let's say Ukraine war. You know, you are now the supplier of this, and you know what they're going to do. It the consequence of supplying the arms, they're going to kill a lot of people by doing this. Now, many people, to make themselves, if you like, clean in doing it, they will say, I didn't know what they're going to do with it. But they know very well. To me, most of my personal life is, can you sleep at night? Having made the decision, you're going to participate in the process of supplying and arming people that will go and do it. The worst example, the clearest example, if somebody, we in an airline business, somebody want to lease our aircraft, and I know very well what they're going to use the aircraft for, and they're going to do 9/11. They're going to go straight and kill everybody on those towers. And when you know that, for me, the answer is clear, no. Even though it's lots of money, that quick money is going to be paid for leasing the aircraft for that kind of thing that they're doing. So to my mind, it's very important for you and all of us good leaders to be good human beings. Because when you do evil, you do bad things, the sins will find you out. When you do good things will also, you'll be rewarded for the good things. And I do believe in providence. It's very, very important for us to, all leaders must first and foremost be good human beings. And that's making good ethical decisions.
Yeah. I like what you said about being good human beings. Sometimes it's not, sometimes we can overcomplicate it, looking at different ethical models, but actually at the root of it is what we are doing, helping us to be good human beings. Is it in line with the pursuit of being a good human being?
Yeah.
But I thought it'd be interesting also to think, being a good human being, and maybe this ties back to that initial verse of, all things are permissible, but not necessarily all things are beneficial. If we're going to talk about what is permissible and what isn't, then as Christians and other, I think most religions as well, certainly the Abrahamic religions, to lie is a sin. And we were having this debate a couple of days ago about if you were a priest in Nazi Germany and you were hiding Jews in your home or in your church or wherever, and someone were to approach you,
And the Nazis with their guns,
were to come up to you
Yeah.
and threaten you
Yeah.
and ask you whether or not you were hiding Jews,
Yeah.
what would we do
Yeah,
actually? Would you lie to save other people's lives? Or will you say, well, I believe that the Bible tells me not to lie, so I will not lie?
Yeah.
This is an interesting one.
That's a real classic ethical conundrum that one has to face. I return back to my 3 rules and I put them into practice. And if I put that there, and I will gather a group of people in the team there, the consequence of lying will save all the Jews that we hidden in the church. You know, the consequence of telling the truth, all of them will die. Then I asked those people in the room there, how many of us really believe which is one we will do? And the second rule is we put that down there, and if it was there, will I pass a litmus test? I personally feel, Leon, I can justify in the public domain that by lying and doing a white lie, I saved 20 or 30 Jews that are out there. And if I was to tell the truth that I was hiding them, they will all die. And if I lied, they will all live. And I believe I put hands on heart on that litmus test rule number 3. I think I can justify it. I can sleep at night. I can tell you, although I'm a priest, at that particular moment, I will go and put up a white lie to defend them. Because there were cases in the Bible where wisdom was seen by putting a white lie. Even in the Bible, Abraham in Genesis 20, he went and lied about the wife Sarah and to save them the marriage.
Yeah, why did he have to lie again? For those who might not be aware.
Yeah, to save Sarah actually.
Yeah. So he lied about her being his sister. So that she wouldn't be so basically so that he wouldn't be killed lah.
Yeah.
Because the fear was that was that the king would say, if he's your husband, he must get out of the way, so I'm going to kill him.
Yeah.
You know. So, and I mean, people have gotten away with far worse as well. I mean, some of the people in the Bible have done some pretty terrible things.
Yes,
and that has not removed them from God's grace. Yeah. So I would also think that personally, telling a little lie in the interest of saving lives, that will certainly make for, if you go back to your litmus test, that will certainly make for a more comfortable Instagram post than to say that I didn't sin, but I was responsible for the 10 people in my home losing their lives as a result. Speaking of putting out content, I think this would be a good place to close today's podcast. And I think I really look forward to editing this one and prepping this up for going live on YouTube. Thank you all for listening to yet another episode of the Game of Impossible podcast. We put up episodes every Friday at 6 a.m. So if you've enjoyed today's conversation and if you haven't subscribed yet, we encourage you to subscribe to both our YouTube as well as Spotify. We have short form content as well that we post up on both IG and TikTok at the Game of Impossible. We hope you've had a good time with us. We'll see you next week.